Thank you. So the aim of this panel is to explore how emerging technologies are reshaping cybersecurity industry dynamics. Before we get into the questions that we prepared, we might just do a quick round of intros, I think, across the panel, starting with Emma.
I'm Emma Philpott, and I'm the CEO of IASME. So we're best known for being the delivery partner for Cyber Essentials. But our heart is in inclusivity and diversity. So we try and make sure that every company can get cyber secure and every cybersecurity company can get work in the Cyber Essentials environment, and every individual can have the opportunity to work as well. So that's us.
Hi everyone, I'm Michalec. I'm a lecturer at the University of Bristol and Bristol Cybersecurity Group, and I'm here in my capacity as the co-author of the UK Cyber Growth Action Plan, which was released this summer, which is a long report with lots of recommendations about how to grow the UK cybersecurity sector.
Hello everyone, my name is Toby Lewis. I'm the Global Head of Threat Analysis at Darktrace, which is largely a made-up job title. Darktrace, for those that aren't aware, is a cybersecurity vendor, so I think I'm legally obliged to sell you something at some point today. But prior to Darktrace, I was part of the NCSC, part of the Incident Management and Threat Operations area, and then prior to the NCSC in, I suppose, some of the predecessors to NCSC, also doing threat operations and incident management.
Hi everyone, I'm Joe Mulhall. I work at the FCA in a defensive capability as the Technical Information Security Officer. I've been working in the industry for about 25 years, maybe a little bit more, primarily in financial services, but across lots of areas of industry.
Thank you. Okay, so we will start off by thinking about cybersecurity and growth. So the UK's industrial strategy has identified cybersecurity as a growth sector. How can the UK stay at the forefront on cybersecurity innovation and commercialisation? And what can regulators do to support growth in the sector? Ola.
Sure, so I can start with, first of all, saying that I think we should recognise that UK is doing already pretty well when it comes to cybersecurity. Let me just bring a few government stats. So in 2024, the UK provision of cyber products and services grew by 12% to £13.2 billion. It currently employs over 67,000 employees, and it's got over 2,000 businesses, and it's the third largest exporter of security products in the world. So we are doing pretty well. So I think it's, we really need to recognize that and put these stats into context. I think one of our key messages from the report is that whole idea of cyber growth should be thought in a kind of pluralistic manner that is pro-social. So yes, indicators like GDP or GVI are really important to track, but this is not the whole story. We also need to look at jobs, we need to look at hiring retention, we need to look at product quality or product assurance. We need to look at survival of startups over time. So there's a whole lot of things that we need to look at. Some of them are easier to measure than others. And this will be the only thing that will give us the full picture. And I think a second thing I also wanted to mention, often in conversations about golden bullets for UK cybersecurity growth, we hear comparisons with other countries, which I think are sometimes quite unfair or quite uncharitable. So when I said that the UK is the third exporter of cyber and other security services, it's behind the US and China, which are completely different countries with completely different politics, with completely different scale, and it just simply doesn't quite square to compare them to each other. Another country we often hear comparisons with is Israel, and why don't we have this Israeli kind of inventive startup culture? And I guess the success of Israel relies on the country being militarized and in conflicts with its neighbors. So I think this creates questions for the UK. Do we want to have the kind of brand of the UK cyber being purely about military capabilities, or do we want a more civilian or a mix? But either way, when we're looking for inspirations from other countries, we should look at the kind of political appropriateness of the translation to the UK.
Thank you. Yes, on the last panel we heard about how cybersecurity culture is part of culture, and I guess that applies too at a national level. Emma, Cyber Essentials.
Yes, I'm going to talk about Cyber Essentials driving growth. So obviously a lot of people think of Cyber Essentials purely as a way of increasing the level of basic level cybersecurity across the UK. but it is actually a really big growth driver. So we license to 400 certification bodies, and that number has grown over time. And the growth is being driven by a demand. And I think this is really key. You can't grow an industry if there's not the demand. And there won't be the demand until people are asking people to do it. So asking people to increase their cybersecurity, checking that they do, having regulators being very specific. We need you to do this, and if you don't, we will tell you off. That drives growth in the cybersecurity industry. And so many of our certification bodies, well, so most of them are micro and small. So many of them, when they start up, they are a startup. It's one person who might have left, I don't know, Palo Alto or KPMG or be some wonderful cybersecurity person, and they decide, actually, I want to work from wherever I live and I want to start my own company. And they can do that often by getting income through Cyber Essentials. Cyber Essentials is never going to make anyone rich, but it brings in income. And so you can become a certification body, one little tiny startup, and that grows. And many of our startups are now running really quite significant cybersecurity consultancies after 10 years. If we can grow the Cyber Essentials schemes and all the other stuff, it will drive the growth. And we're seeing that already. And then the flip side is we have more than 1,000 assessors or advisors now in the network. And as we grow the demand for Cyber Essentials even, so that's been growing about 15 to 20% every year, we're hoping to see a bigger growth. We need more people as assessors and advisors. And it is exactly that kind of role that can be an entry-level role. So we are now got a new job title, Trainee Cyber Essentials Assessor, where you come in without any experience, any qualifications, and you start an apprenticeship and you do Cyber Essentials assessments from day one, obviously with a mentor, and you are bringing people into the industry. So by driving the demand, you're making massive growth. And I know that a lot of other countries are interested in Cyber Essentials, not just because of the baseline security, but because of this driver of economic growth.
Thank you. Toby.
I think for me, a large part, I think Emmy sort of touched on it there, is around the incentives for organisations to be secure. And I think there's definitely an arm from a regulatory perspective of what can we do to effectively enforce some minimum standards of cybersecurity. But I think it's about framing it correctly and about getting organisations to want to be secure. And I think it's about recognising that cybersecurity is much a selling point of a business as it is security theatre, like I think we heard in the last panel, or something you have to do, or a tick box exercise. So I think there's something in there around how we talk about cybersecurity, how we mature the sectors more broadly, in recognising that being cybersecure is actually a really positive thing for your organisation, maybe even a selling point. So I think that will help drive the uptake more broadly.
Yeah, thank you. And Joe?
Thanks. So I think to drive forward growth as an industry, cybersecurity has to get better at delivery, learn from other areas of business. That speed to market that you might see in more traditional frontline systems, we need to bring that into cybersecurity. I've been delivering technology into organisations for a long time, and quite often still the focus is on, have we bought the right thing? Does it do this? And where the real value is in the integration. Have we delivered value? Now that is a question you can ask across the technology sector, and you've got a lot of maturity there. And I think through driving that, we reduce the cost of cybersecurity, not just in terms of dollars spent, but the resources and the time taken to achieve what needs to be done to enable the business to deliver value.
Thank you very much. We talked earlier on, particularly before the coffee break, about emerging technologies in cybersecurity. So the next topic I'd like us to touch on is how you see those key emerging technologies as reshaping growth strategies and competitive dynamics in the industry. Joe, over to you first on this one.
I think there's a few things that we always have a little bit of a think about when we think about a new emerging technology. Like I'm going to take my own field in the space of AI. From my perspective, there's generally three different ways of looking at a new piece of technology. And the first that we're always really, really drawn to is, but what if the attackers get hold of it? And I think, unfortunately, that is an invariable part of the way of life. But I think there's two others that we need to consider as well. And number one is that as organisations, they will want to incorporate elements of that new technology as part of their daily business, as part of their business functionality. And I think, therefore, we've got to be able to consider the implementation of those new technologies in as secure a way as possible. So actually, if an organisation wants to implement some use of AI because, for their HR systems, I can't think why, but there we go. But if they wanted to, what's the guidance to be able to implement it in a secure way? And there's a third angle, which is then looking at those new technologies as a mechanism of a capability for the purposes of defence. And obviously that's where Darktrace comes in more broadly. But I think it also exists across so many other technologies of, rather than instantly seeing them as a sort of Luddite view, I suppose, of the end is nigh and they're going to take over the world, but actually what are the benefits that it brings as well?
Yeah, thank you. And Joe, what do you see as the role of regulators in that? To what extent is this really for the private sector to lead on, and where do regulators come in?
So my role is actually in the practitioning side. I'm not on the regulator side. But as speaking to the general point, I think one of the issues I see us trying to deal with is tackling the safety net that we need to provide. So as the business wants to explore something new, we don't want to be in the old world of saying, no, wait, stop. We want to be telling them, we understand what you're trying to achieve. These are the things to focus on. We'll help you through that. And particularly with AI being probably the biggest market mover in emerging technology, we're starting to look at determinism. And I think one of the other speakers mentioned this. So do we need non-deterministic systems or deterministic systems? How have we applied controls to those systems in the past? Is this truly something new? Well, we have a lot of non-deterministic systems in our businesses. It's our employees. But we find ways to apply controls to them without worrying too much, enabling business and encouraging.
Thank you. Ola.
Okay, so I'm going to start with some data as well, so some stats from DCIT. So I think there's a little bit of a worrying trend that on the one hand, there is a rise in about 20% rise in cybersecurity graduates. There is about 49% of businesses have expressed that they have a gap in cyber talent and cyber jobs. But on the other hand, cybersecurity graduates hiring have been slowing down by 33% in the last year or two. So, the way I interpret it seems like there is a provision of talent, there is an expression of need, but I'm not sure if that translates to economic demand and why not? And I guess probably there is too early to kind of conceptualize why. It could be just a wider economic slowdown because there are similar trends in other sectors, but I think also we should address the elephant in the room, that is AI. And in a recent British Standards Institute survey, I think 41% of managers have said that using AI allowed them to decrease their hiring of their employees. And that's a survey across several countries and several sectors. And well, I think, that's, it's interesting that they're experimenting, why not? It's their choice, it's their prerogative. But I think it's not just bad news for graduates and for educators. I think also it's a risk for those managers in terms of long-term provision of career pipeline. So my message to be, for now, is, if you want to experiment with AI, surely do that. Make sure you test whatever variables you're changing, introducing, but first and foremost, keep investing in talent and humans.
Yes, thank you. And as we discussed much earlier on this morning, we've got the fact that significant cyber attacks are increasing rapidly, right? So that the need for this is growing, not reducing. Emma?
Well, just two thoughts, really. On the AI and job losses, it will be job changes, I think. And it's going to be getting to understand, what role people have in the new age, rather than saying, don't get rid of people, even if AI does it better. So I think, you know, it's a changing, confusing situation for people, and what do you train as, and where is it that AI is better than people? But I guess it's always going to happen, and there's, so for example, we recruited somebody years ago who was a dancer, and we recruited her because she's really good at writing, and she was non-technical. So we got her to write all our non-technical stuff. But she has started using AI to write a lot of the non-technical stuff. And she has become really, really good at using AI in our content reporting. And now we are going to use AI in other stuff, including more technical stuff. And the best person in the company who is good at AI now is this ex-dancer who we hired because she was non-technical. She is our best prompt engineer. You know, you didn't have prompt engineers before, and now here she is. So it is giving her an amazing opportunity. She's like one of the key people driving change forward in the company. And I think that's just a small example of all of it, where we can embrace new technologies. But with all of it, there's such a temptation to say, well, you know, it's this new technology, and I'm as guilty of this as anyone else. It comes back to the basics. I mean, I think the breaches we're seeing, I don't know, a lot of them are the same things. I mean, AI is making it faster, but you just have to, you know, have you got two-factor authentication on there? Are you patching? Even though it's an AI attacking, have you patched? So it's, you know, it can be very dazzling and exciting and wonderful that there's a new technology coming in, but you've just still got to get the basics right.
Sorry, just I think there's a few things there, and I think particularly around this idea of you know, attackers using AI, and it becomes so fantastically sort of crazy and almost Hollywood-esque how AI is being used. But the reality is it's a productivity tool for the attackers as much as a productivity tool for us. They're still sending phishing emails. The English is just a bit better. They're still creating malware. It's just they're doing it a bit faster than they were before. So AI is an enabler, and I think that the risk is, particularly around from an employment perspective, is organisations who equate it as a direct replacement, and it's not. And I say this as an AI company, it's not. It is in almost all cases an enabler, a way of kind of lowering the bar or providing some sort of productivity gains, but it's not a replacement. And Ola, to your point around some of the job market issues, as someone who hires cybersecurity graduates, this is come across as slightly flippant, it's because everyone wants to be a pen tester, and we don't have enough pen testing roles for them to do. So actually, Emma, more to your point, we've, you know, certainly within our organisation, made a real big kind of model in terms of how we recruit, which is, generally speaking, we don't hire cybersecurity graduates. And that's not because they're bad, but invariably I want a much more rounded individual. I want that curiosity, I want that thinking space, and actually most of my cyber analysts are, you know, humanities graduates. And as an engineer, that makes me shudder. But the idea being is we want that much more rounded skill set, and I can teach the skills afterwards, but I can't teach the personality that goes with it.
No?
Yeah.
Come in. So I think one of the things that I'm seeing a shift towards is a greater focus on data security. So we tend to do quite well with things like authentication, MFA mentioned earlier, network security. These are all things that are relatively easy to understand, relatively easy to implement. But my experience is that generally we don't do so well in the data security space. New technologies, quantum and its effect on cryptography, artificial intelligence, it really draws attention to information. What is our information? How do we understand that better? And I think that brings new opportunities. And I hope to see industry pick up to those challenges.
Thank you. Let's move on to think a little bit about the industry itself. How do you think that the role of large technology firms is likely to evolve? And do you think that SMEs will continue to seek out acquisition rather than scaling independently? Toby, do you want to start on this one?
I mean, I say this as a company that's just been acquired, so there's a slight bit of tinge there. Look, I think, you know, if we look at, you know, at the start of this, we mentioned about sort of cybersecurity being a growth sector, an idea of creating these small sole trader organizations, small to medium enterprises, with the hopeful aim of becoming acquired in the future. But I think we've got to look at other opportunities as well in terms of how does the UK marketplace encourage organisations to become fully fledged, mature organisations themselves. And I said as an organisation, we started 13, 14 years ago. We listed on the London Stock Exchange, and then we went back into private equity. And I've seen throughout all of those different stages pros and cons of doing that, and whether or not an organisation would want to go through the same thing maybe is another matter. But I think one of the really interesting things for me, and maybe this is to sort of pivot back to the regulatory angle, is I come back to what I mentioned at the start, which is around incentives. In how do we get organisations to be more secure more generally? And you mentioned a bit of a buzzword there, which was supply chain. For me, there's an element around what can we do to incentivise those smaller organisations to be secure. And one of those is we'll partner with you, but only if you meet a minimum baseline standard. And Cyber Essentials feels like a pretty good one to pin that to.
So I mean, I can comment on the acquiring versus growth first of all. So IASME started off as just 2 people, and our annual turnover was £1,000. So it was very, very small. And that was about 13 years ago. And we grew, but we've sold. So obviously we're not a new technology type company, but potentially we could have carried on growing by ourselves and, become some great big UK company. But it is really, really hard. It's really hard doing it yourself. And there is always the temptation to obviously exit, to be acquired, because otherwise you can't leave. You're just there. You have all this responsibility. You keep having to get investment and you can't leave. And so I think you can encourage people to stay in it more and not be acquired by supporting them and by giving them help. And I think that is, other countries have different models and probably give companies more help to just grow and get funding by themselves without being acquired. Anyway, so that's my personal view on that. In terms of, trying to get people to stick to the basics and have the supply chain secured, just being very specific for small companies, I think. Because I know that particularly in regulation, there's a lot of discussion about trying to get organisations to understand their risk and doing more and it being based on their risk assessment. Small companies just don't have the skills or the understanding to do that often. They just need to be told, do this. So that's the minimum. And I think for a non-mature company, you need to do that. With a mature company, not so much. And that actually doesn't reflect the size, because you get some large organisations that are not mature and need to be told, do this. But I mean, as regulators, you know that.
Yeah, so actually, when I first saw this question, I struggled with it quite a bit because I think it should be a question really to the UK politicians, because I don't really know whether there is a convincing visions for how should states support businesses and which businesses should be supported strategically, small, large, in particular sector. I just see lots of conflicting messages, and I'm not a British national, so maybe that's why, but let me give you a few examples. So on one hand, the industrial strategies littered with phrases like homegrown businesses, sovereignty, and so on and so on. We also, apparently Britain is also a nation of shopkeepers, and in cyber sector, over half of the registered businesses are micro businesses, so under 10 employees. So on one hand, maybe the small business is the way. On the other hand, the national government cyber advisory board is quite a mix of different companies, quite a lot of multinationals. I think only 2 members, I would say, they will represent interests of small businesses and startups. And also we've got these very sovereign AI deals with Microsoft, Google, OpenAI. So, again, I'm not quite sure what sovereign AI means in that sense, because neither of these are UK companies. So I guess my message will be for the UK politicians and regulators to be really stringent with these terms that are used in policy. So in summary, open source AI competition announced by DC that it's using Meta Llama models, which again are not open source. Just words like that, or perhaps we should have an explicit explanation from Palantir when they give security and privacy guarantees to nature's data. Okay, what does that actually mean in practice? So I would like this conversation to be happening in the maybe more detailed level. And at the moment, we're just throwing quite a lot of high-level buzzwords, and I'm not quite sure whether they can be, they can be credible at the moment.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing us to regulation and the role of regulators in this. Joe, I know you said you have more of a practitioner's perspective, but nonetheless, do you want to comment on that?
I just wanted to touch on the mergers and acquisitions part. So in previous lives, I've done a lot of work as securing businesses that are going through mergers, acquisitions, divestments, which is all a very interesting area. But I think in today's landscape, particularly as we put more focus on supply chain risk, the question of whether large companies are going to acquire smaller companies, as somebody who uses cybersecurity businesses, well, that then throws up some questions that probably weren't at the forefront of our minds in previous years. So what happens if the company I have running my secure service edge acquires the company that is doing my encryption? I've now consolidated risk into a single supplier, and I have to start worrying about that in a different way. So I think it's a new challenge for cybersecurity professionals to ponder.
Thank you. Yeah, good point. And on that regulation question, what is the role for regulators in supporting this growth journey of SMEs in particular?
So I think this might relate to the point I made at the beginning, which really is we need to be enabling delivery of business value. And if we focus cybersecurity more on that, that will end up driving growth. There's huge opportunities in cybersecurity. We have huge problem spaces. And ultimately, isn't that what business is there to do, is to try new and innovative ways to solve these problems. And yeah, we have to be there to support that.
Sure, so I can bring a few recommendations from the report. Quite a lot of our interviews shared lots of struggles with navigating the government procurement system, and that's not, again, limited to cybersecurity, the outdated website, the lack of knowledge of the opportunities being there. So recommendations could relate to upgrading of the procurement system in cyber and actually arranging more pre-procurement meetings. So, for example, that's already done in the MOD. Second one, actually on Cyber Essentials, to again make it a requirement across many more government departments. Again, currently a thing in the Cyber Essentials Plus in MOD, if I understand correctly. But again, there is appetite to do it in furthermore departments, and I guess maybe it could be low-hanging fruit, hopefully. And I think the third one is on harmonizing UK and EU regulations. So there's upcoming Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, Act, I think still a bill, which it's an opportunity to harmonize it a little bit more with what's happening in the EU with regards to NIS2. I'm not sure that, I don't think the acts, the both documents are looking like they're going to match very closely, but it's still kind of up in the air. But I guess I'm not saying that as a kind of pro-EU person. That's not really the sentiment from our interviews. It's mostly about the compliance burden and having to comply with several regulations. And because I've said that the UK is the third largest exporter and EU is indeed the largest export market. So by harmonizing, at least by doing crosswalks of kind of translating between the EU and UK regulations, we can help businesses with making this burden a little bit easier.
Thank you. And yes, I do hear those points on government procurement and on harmonising and streamlining. Emma, you touched already briefly on the need for regulators to be specific.
Yeah, so this is partly as somebody who's run a small business, that I just need someone to tell me what to do, rather than giving me vague instructions to go away and do a project on something that I don't feel that I know anything about. So for companies who are not cybersecurity companies, going away and asking them to understand their risk and understand the threat and things like that is, yes, they might have a team to do that, but they might not. And for them that is a big task. And when they're busy, they might want to be secure, but it's like, please just tell me what to do. And that's why for the lower maturity organizations that don't have a cybersecurity team, the more specific you can be, the better. because they just want to, they don't want to not do it. They just want to go away and do what you've said, rather than having to learn what the risk is and learn what the threats are, which might be better for them, but they just don't have the bandwidth to do it, especially if they're not very mature.
Thank you. Toby.
I think there's some connections back to the previous session around how we train our users and the people that we have in our organisations to be cybersecurity experts. And the short answer is we'll never get our staff to be all cybersecurity experts. There's always an element where they've got other jobs to do. And so particularly for small organisations, they're not going to have the resources to be secure themselves. And I very much echo that view that when you start to get into those more immature spaces, you kind of just need to tell them what to do. And it seems that if you look in any other part of the regulator space, whether it's fire safety or something else, there's a very prescriptive set of codes that an organisation has to do, except with cybersecurity, which is broadly just do the right thing, whatever that is. And I think, particularly for those organisations very small, they need a lot more guidance in terms of how to do that.
I do have another question, but I think that because we have just over 10 minutes left, I might actually first open it up to the audience, because it would be good to hear audience perspectives on this discussion and questions. So I'm looking for hands. Oh, I see one. I think there will be a mic coming your way.
It'd be really interesting to see Panel's thoughts on how do you get closer to evidence-based policy, and how can we use evidence as ways to demonstrate what can deliver growth, because businesses want to see that there's going to be pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. So it'd be interesting to your perspective there. We talked earlier on about phishing and does phishing training work, and I was quite surprised when I looked into it that it was only this year that there's really some data started to come out that says actually it doesn't really help. It's 2% better, so why bother? So any thoughts on how we get to a more evidence-based approach, because businesses like evidence, and evidence can help demonstrate that we can grow?
I mean, I'll just take that one briefly. I think one of the challenges we have in cybersecurity more generally is everybody wants data that proves value, and I think you broadly referenced that as well. And that's sort of why a lot of organisations do phishing simulations, because you get numbers. That's largely it, right? If you think about it, pretty much everyone in this room has probably passed a driving test, most people, but we've probably also sped a little bit from time to time, or maybe got in the car with a few too many beers. So we all, as individuals, take risks, and therefore there's always a question of whether training by itself is the right thing. But you're right, I suppose, to highlight that data is one of the hardest parts in cybersecurity to kind of get right. And there is often an element here where you almost equate it to sort of the insurance industry in some respects, is that you only can count on your cybersecurity when the worst happens. When it's working, you kind of hopefully don't know it's there. And that's kind of bad, because everyone goes, oh, we don't need that, let's rip it out. So it is a perennial challenge. I don't think there's necessarily a right answer, but it is an issue.
So with Cyber Essentials, we happen to have data. And this is one of the powerful aspects, because it's so big, because there's so many people, we can start actually comparing statistics. So we've got the number of people that made a claim that have got Cyber Essentials, and we've got all those organisations that have got the same insurance package, that we can compare the claim rate. And so that's where you get the 92% less likely to make a claim. Now that number is going to go up and down, obviously, as the claims go up and down, the rates. But it gives us a good way to at least judge, theoretically, what people with Cyber Essentials and what people without Cyber Essentials are like in terms of claim rates. And then you have organisations like St James's Place that ask all their network to get Cyber Essentials, and overnight they saw an 80% reduction in incidents. So because Cyber Essentials has got so many data points, we can start getting evidence like that. And so hopefully we'll get more in the future.
Yeah, just to add to the point on difficulty. So in the report, we've been trying to really kind of hone down the message that the growth of cybersecurity industry will mean, hopefully, the more resilience across UK businesses, which then will translate to the growth of the UK economy. However, this is something that is extremely difficult to quantify. Sometimes it's really difficult to argue, because some people just see security as compliance. They don't really see this link between growth and resilience. But the reason why it's difficult to measure that, other than the reasons you've already mentioned, is that cybersecurity attacks are just extremely variable, and they very differ in their severity. they're difficult to predict, and they impacts aren't kind of evenly distributed on different businesses. So yeah, just to add to the pile of difficulties, it's something that is extremely difficult to model. I'm not a modeler, so it's luckily not my job, but I guess our call is to, again, call for more data and more stringency in the approach to get that evidence base.
Thank you. I couldn't hear the entirety of the question, but I think I heard phishing mentioned a couple of times there. So to contrast to your point, I think we can get lots of data when it comes to phishing. We can not only monitor, total volumes of emails coming in, we're running phishing simulations so we can see how people fall for simulated phishing, but we can also understand through manual reporting of phishing how effective the humans are at detecting phishing. And we can easily generate a false negative rate there, false positive rates, and start to see now that AI is being used in generating phishing, how hard it is for people to detect. 50% of phishing attacks, it's going to be very hard for a human to see, but we now have defensive AI that can step into that role and add value.
So I just want to point out, it was something that Emma, you mentioned that I think kind of triggered that thought, which is really about those organisations that have huge sort of swathes of data across a whole range of organisations. And dare I say, one of the really kind of good sort of sectors to look at for that is the insurance industry, right? Their whole role and remit is reducing risk. And actually we're starting to see this now as cyber insurance has matured. I would say historically a few years ago it wasn't ideal, but it's very much matured now. And actually starting to look at how the insurance industry looks at organisations as a way of, well, actually, can we give you a discount on your premium because of X, Y, Z? So there's some really good data that's starting to come out there, and yeah, it's a good way of, I think, of putting data on it.
Can I just say, though, that the insurance industry and cybersecurity is very much around large organisations. That the incidence of insuring small companies, except for the Cyber Essentials, is really, really small. And so when they start giving stats, it tends to be enterprise.
The only other point I'd make on evidence-based policy is DCIT aren't with us anymore, but Liz did mention earlier on this morning that I think one feature of the bill would be requirements for more incident reporting. So that will also give us a bigger evidence base. I think we've got time for one more really quick question if somebody has got one in the audience. Oh, one from online.
Thank you. There's a question from Human Katecha online about whether the panel has any recommendations for lessons learned papers around the pitfalls of using AI to support cybersecurity, anything on cybersecurity AI integration applications, best use cases and worse, and things that they can take away.
Great question.
I'm really trying to be really hard, not to be biased here. I think one of the things that I will always say when anyone asks about the use of AI in cybersecurity is to remember that AI is not a single thing, that it's an entire umbrella term for lots of different applications, and at its core, it's data science. But there's different applications, and it's about selecting the right use of AI for the right task, and not just blindly sticking into ChatGPT and go, hey, it's AI. So it's very much looking at different applications, recognizing the different strengths and weaknesses of different AI uses. And I think that requires maybe a bit more of a mature understanding of the technology than maybe some of the buzzwords we see in the industry today.
I'm going to largely agree. So I think, and perhaps this runs slightly counter to very prescriptive requirements, when we try to address a problem in cybersecurity with a given tool set or another, it's going to vary depending on what your business, your organization is doing. There are similarities in the approach we can take, but the outcomes can just be very different based on what it is that you're trying to secure.
Really a super quick comment rather than a question is cybersecurity as a driver of economic growth is twofold. One is the industry itself, which I think we do see growth in, and the other is what cybersecurity brings to the organizations it secures and the trust. And that in itself is priceless. And I think that's what we see with schemes like Cyber Essentials, that people who don't understand cyber can go, that's a badge I recognize. That gives me an element of trust, and we've seen that in other industries. So yeah, I think it's just making sure we see it in both aspects.
Thank you. Mickey Kana, Trilateral Research. The question I think Emma raised about lessons learned. and where you can find more information about that, OWASP is a really good resource for, first of all, explaining sort of what the top 10 vulnerabilities around LLMs and also secure agentic solutions. Open Web Application Security Project has sort of come up on there. What's OWASP? And they also have a quarterly research paper that tells you kind of what's been in the news in terms of AI related attacks and what the lessons learned from those attacks were. So it's a really good resource.
Thank you. That was OWASP for anybody who didn't catch it. With that, we need to wrap up this panel. I want to say a huge thank you to Emma, Ola, Toby and Joe for really insightful comments, and thank you to the audience questions as well. Please join me in giving them a round of applause.